Okay, if we'll all just give me a minute here, I'll get everything set up and running. Okay, if we'll all just give me a minute here, I'll get everything set up and running. All right, welcome to the webinar. Just give me a minute here, get everything. Sorry about that, that echo over there. All right. There we go. We should be able to see my screen. Hopefully that switched appropriately. I believe it did. Hi everyone. I'm just waiting on confirmation that everybody can see me, and then we'll get started here. All right, so it looks like I can see me here. So it looks like I think we're all set and good to go. So let's get started. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about WebSockets, and how I'm going to do that is, oops, hold on, somebody said that all they can see is a little bit about WebSockets, and just making sure that everybody has the right link for a moment. Bear with me if you are watching. Okay, so we are good. I've got confirmation that we're good, so I'm going to go ahead and get started here. All right, so I got Perfect Assistant up. Today we'll be talking a little bit about using WebSockets in Perfect. I wanted to touch on one of the more advanced topics because it's something that hasn't really been done in a lot of the screencasts or webinars yet. Lucas will be fielding the questions to me afterwards, so just go ahead and bear with me until we're set. This should take hopefully about 45 minutes to go through. I'll be focusing on the Swift aspect and the Perfect aspect, and I won't be focusing too much on the HTML, CSS, or JavaScript, though we will go through a little bit of how the flow works, of how the front end works. So let's get started. I have here Perfect Assistant, and I'm just going to go ahead, and I got a lot going on in my downloads folder, but I'm just going to make a chat, and I'm going to go in there, and we're going to use this folder. I'm going to save. While that's working, I'm going to set up my web root over here. So here's our chat, and I'm just going to go ahead and make a web root because we're going to need to serve a static web page. And I'm just going to grab some pre-written things that I've already had for the demo, just the HTML, the CSS, and the JavaScript for us to use. And I'm going to go ahead and load those in there while that is making me a project. And just to double check and make sure, I'm just going to go ahead and regenerate that Xcode project because I just added that web root in there, and I'm going to open it. First thing I'm going to do is double check that everyone can see this window, and I'm just going to get this as big as I can on the broadcast screen without going to the edge of my monitors because I want to make sure you guys can actually see it. Let's open up some of this stuff here so we can see what's going on. I switched to my executable target, and I'm just going to go ahead and edit that, and I'm going to use a custom working directory, which is just going to be the chat in my downloads. That way, if we don't switch to a custom working directory, of course, we can't use the web root because it won't see it. All right, so we should have just a basic perfect project. I've enlarged the text. Hopefully everybody out there can see it real well. I'll watch for comments just in case anybody can't. But to me, from this end, it looks pretty good on my screen. So we've got the boilerplate in here for the standard server, and I'm just going to go ahead and do some cleanup. First thing I don't need is the second server instance in here. I'm not going to use any of these filters for now. I'm just trying to keep this real simple. We're going to call it chat. I'm going to call this port. We're going to use port. I'm actually going to grab the routes. Oops, hold on. There we go. I'm going to move this up here to let routes equal, just to kind of keep everything clean, and then I'm going to put routes into there. I'm going to clean up some of these comments just to make it a little bit easier to view on the live stream. And then for the same purpose, one of the first things I usually do in my projects is I am going to add a new Swift file, and I'm just going to call that handlers, put it in sources, make sure it's on the right target, which in our case is chat. And then I'm just going to grab this and copy it, and I'm going to remove that handler, and then I'm just going to go ahead in here and replace this. So we have our test handler for now. Again, just going to clean up some of those comments, get our project ready, and then of course I am going to start this building and give it a little bit of test just to make sure I didn't screw anything up. And I should get that on. Preload that. If you are looking for this example that we're working on, or any example for perfect, if you go to github.com/perfect examples, there's a whole repository just absolutely jam-packed with examples. It's a really great resource. There's a lot in there. This is the one that we are working with, is the perfect chat demo. This should have launched by now, and we should be able to get a hello world from it. Good. So now that I know that works, I'm going to change this, because remember I wanted to serve a static web page. So I'm going to move that to the top, and then I'm just going to make this handler under the chat, because we're going to need two handlers for this, one for all the static files to serve our front end, and then one chat handler to serve the WebSocket off of. And I'm just going to go ahead and rebuild that. It should serve my index.html. If I did that right, it should just be a blank orange page for now, which is fine, and chat should still return our hello world. So everything's working real nicely for us. All right. So, of course, if we're going to make a chat, we're going to need a model. So let's first talk about a chat user. So I'm going to go ahead and create a chat user file to store that model in, make sure that I'm on the right target. Our target membership needs to be correct, or everything's going to be real frustrating. Just going to leave all that boilerplate in there now. So for the purpose of this demo, I use Gravatar to pull in pictures for people's avatars. The API is stupidly simple to use. You just put avatar after it, and you get the default. Or if you put an MD5 hash after that avatar of a valid email that they have an image for, it's just going to go ahead and give you that image. But we'll get more on that later. For now, let's talk about models. So if we're going to have an avatar, we're going to have three things. We're going to have the user's email, because we need that to get the avatar, and we need it to make sure that that's unique and that we can identify people in a vaguely unique way, at least for the purposes of demo. And then we're going to need a display name, which is basically what they want to be called, because I'd rather be called Ryan than my full email address. So we'll have an email, and whoops, we need to make a class. Chat user. Let's just start with that. Now, one of the things I like to do in my classes is if I know I'm not going to need to change something after it's created, I always make it private and I put an underscore before it. So avatar URL is going to be the URL to get the Gravatar. We're going to have an email address, and then we're also going to have a display name. Again, the reason I make those private is because once a user is created, we're not going to be modifying any of that stuff because we don't want the back end and the front end to get all disconnected, which means I'm going to need their computed property counterparts, which will be var email, which is also a string, of course, and it only gets a getter, which just simply returns the value of the private variable. Our avatar URL is also a string, and we are just going to return the private value. And this just makes sure that we only have getters that are publicly accessible, so again, we can't manipulate a chat user once they are created. Got a display name, and we're just using strings here, real easy. Return the display name. We're going to need an initializer that does stuff. So thinking about what we're going to be using, the front end's going to be in JavaScript and all that. We're going to have a WebSocket and be using that. We're going to be sending messages back and forth. So what we're probably going to be doing is sending JSON back and forth because that's generally the easiest way to go about sending messages from the back end to the front end and across the web and all that. So what I like to do with this type of initializer is I'm just going to pull it in from JSON, and when we decode JSON, with the perfect library, we're of course going to want to get a dictionary of string any, and because we're taking in a dictionary of string any, there's a chance this won't work, so I'm going to mark it as throws, and I'm going to put an enum up here at the top. I'm just going to call it user error, which of course is an error. Okay, and I'm just going to have a case called failed to create. Okay, so if we did get a dictionary of string any, I am going to want to make sure that we have a few things, which is going to be the information we need, or these things above. So the first thing I'm going to do is guard let email equal JSON, which is our dictionary, and the value of email. Let's make sure we have an email, and of course that is string any, so we need to cast it as a string since it's not string. Yeah, I mean, I guess we could probably tell it that it's string, but we're going to let avatar equal. Generally we use string any because we can get booleans and things back and forth, and it's just easier to leave it how I normally use it. Let's see, that's going to be the avatar. And then, of course, we're going to need a name, which is going to be, that's going to come from the front end as display name. And I know that because I already wrote the front end, and it's hanging out over here in webchat.js. Oh, and I also forgot to cast that as a string and cast that as a string. Okay, once we've got those things, since we're using a guard statement, we need to do something if we don't have any of those things, which is to throw our error. Failed to create. Okay, so we've got the things we need. If we've made it past our guard statement, we can just set email equal to email. We can set avatar URL equal to avatar, and we can set our display name equal to the name that we grabbed here. Okay, and then I'm also going to go down here and I'm going to get another initializer, and you'll see why in a second. I'm going to actually make a bot. So when we have chat, generally we have that one weird user who's bot and just makes announcements, you know, somebody left, somebody joined, all that type of stuff. So I'm going to make a plain initializer so that if we make an instance of this class with just a plain initializer, we can get a bot. And we'll just set email to nil because that's not likely a value that we're going to get from an actual user when we ask for an email. Out in the real world, we should probably validate emails, but for the purpose of keeping this demo concise and fun and exciting, I know WebSockets are one of the most exciting topics, I'm just going to set this equal to the default Gravatar, so he can have an image to go with him. And then I'm going to set this equal to display name just equal to bot, since he is a bot. All right. So that's the basic model. We can make a bot, we can make a user from the front end data, and we have all the things we know. Now, we're going to need to make a chat room next. But before we go ahead and do that, there's a couple things we're going to have to know about our users. Number one, we're going to have to know, well, which user is it, and have an instance of this with all the data, and we're going to have to know what socket they're coming in on, so that later we can have a reference to that, and we can go ahead and use socket.sendString and send them a message. So what I'm going to do is, I find that the easiest way to do that is to store chat users and sockets in a dictionary of chat users and sockets. So I'm going to make this hashable, so that we can go ahead and store that in a collection, and so that we can go ahead and make comparisons to them later. So I can say things like, if the person sending the, if the person sending the message is in this dictionary, don't send them the message that they sent. We'll get there in a bit. So Hashable has the protocol has two requireds. We're just going to return email.hashValue for our hash value. So we're kind of hinging on our email being our unique identifying value in this class, and that's fine. And then we need static func equals, and that of course takes left-hand side, which is in our case going to be a chat user, and right-hand side, which is going to be a chat user, and that has to return a boolean to be valid. And then we can just, since we already hashed the email and everything, we can just return left-hand side dot email is equal to right-hand side dot email. And that will give us a Boolean value to return. It'll hinge on our unique email, and Hashable will allow us to both make things equatable and compare them, and allow us to store them in a collection for later. So that completes the chat user and the logic behind it. Next, I am, of course, going to move on to making a chat room. So I'm going to call this chat room, and I'm going to call it chat room service. And when I make singletons, which is what I'm going to do here, I like to call it a service, just so that it's a quick way to look at a file and know, hey, that's a singleton, like a data service that I'm using to get things done in one place. So if you're not familiar with singletons or creating services and data services and things from the iOS world, we can get you familiar here with it real quick. It's basically the concept is the class stores a reference to an instance of itself. That way you always use that instance from everywhere in your code, and no matter what you do, all the information is going to be stored in the same place in RAM, and no matter where you access it from, you're getting the same thing. So we are also, since this is a WebSocket, going to need the perfect WebSockets model in addition to all the rest of the standard perfect libraries that I imported. So let's talk about making our chat room itself. So since it's going to be a singleton, we need to make it a class and not a struct. Chat room. All right, so what do we need in our chat room? Well, the first thing is we need a static let instance equal chat room, which is how we create our singleton in the first place. And that allows us other places in our code to say things like chatroom.instance.do something, right? And no matter what, we're always going to talk to everybody because we're always using this instance right here, chat room, that is created by that singleton. All right. You'll kind of see how this works here in a bit. So we're probably going to need and I'm just we're going to need some chats. So and I'm just going to initialize an empty dictionary of chat user and WebSocket so that we'll know who's online and where to talk to them by who's essentially in this dictionary. And I'm just going to initialize an empty here so that we don't have to worry about initializers or anything else with our singleton. It just keeps life simple. We're also going to need a bot to talk to everybody. And remember, in our chat user class, we made a bot by just simply an empty initializer will make us a bot. So we've got a bot. Now we need to do stuff. So there'll be 3 things that we need to do in a chat room to make it, to give it basic functionality. We need to join, we need to leave, and we need to send messages. Right? And that is not a fun, that's a func. So let's talk about a user joining. What are we going to need to know when someone joins? Well, we're going to need to know who is joining, and that is our chat user, and we're going to need to know where to talk to them, which is our WebSocket. And simply when somebody joins, we're just going to add them as the user, and the value of the user is going to be the socket, so that we'll know who's in here and where to talk to them at. All right? And as far as leaving goes, well, we're going to make chats.remove key for value, or remove value for key, and that's going to take a user. So we also need to know who's leaving, but we already know what socket they're on. So all we need to know is who's leaving. So we'll just remove that. Or, you know, of course you can always just, you could set it to nil if it's optional. But we're just going to leave it like that. And then we're going to need to send a message. So what do we need to know to send a message? Well, we need to know what that message is. And since that text is so clear, I like to omit the message right there, so we don't have to write message every time. And then we need to know who is sending it. So we're going to take a string and a chat user so we know who is sending that message. So let's talk about join for just a second. We should probably announce when someone joins, so we should probably send a message, and we should probably send it from that particular user that's joining. Or actually, I'm sorry, the bot should be sending the message when someone joins. So what I'll be doing is, so we'll take that user, and then we'll take their display name, and we can just say that they joined. So we'll have the bot send a message. And likewise, when someone leaves, we should probably also announce that. Whoops, copy it. I'm just going to paste that there and change that to left. So now all we have to do is talk about actually sending a message. So we're talking about communicating with the front end website from the back end again. So I'm going to say let dict equal this, and we're going to make ourselves a dictionary. We're going to say what user, user.display name. We'll send that to the front end, and I already know what goes in here because I already wrote the front end, and I'll go over how that flow works. But we're going to need to send a message with it, and the message we're going to need to send when you're using chat, usually you have a name and then a colon and then actually what they said. So we're going to send that user display name, so that it says, Ryan colon and then what Ryan said. So we'll actually send the message here. And then we'll also need to send the avatar URL so that we know what they look like, and we can put that into the code on the front end. So since we're going to encode JSON and send that, we're going to have to move into a do try catch, and they can just print failed to encode JSON if we failed, because so let JSON equal the dict.json encoded string, and of course that is why we're in a do try catch, so we got to try that since it's a throwing function. So we've got our message, we've got it all encoded and ready to send. How do we actually send that? Well, remember, we've got a list of users and their sockets and how to talk to them. So let's say for our chat user, socket in chats. Sorry, I'm typing a little fast to try and make sure that our webinar is concise. So we've got for chat user, socket in chats. we need to send the message. But the first thing I'm actually going to want to do, and this is one of the reasons we made chat users hashable, I want to say if chat user does not equal user. So if the sending user is not equal to the user we're iterating through, and this is just preventing us from sending the message to ourselves. So if I'm on the front end and I send a message to myself, I don't want to get that back. I only want everyone else to get it. So as long as I am not the sending user, go ahead and grab that socket and then just use the send string message. And that's going to take three things. The string, which is our JSON, which is what we want to send. Final is going to be true. And then we take completion. I'm just going to move that out to the end in a closure. And I'm just going to say print message was sent by user dot chat user dot display name. So that'll be pretty simple since that's required. Now let's talk about why this final is true. In WebSockets, when you're sending messages, you can send multiple messages if you're working with a really big piece of data and you want to let the stream interrupt for maybe other messages to go back and forth before this. So when we pass through here, we're just saying, hey, this is the last message I'm going to send you for this particular piece of data. Don't worry about waiting for more. That's pretty much extremely common. It's rare to send false there unless, like I said, you're working with a really big piece of data and you have a reason to interrupt it before it's fully sent. I haven't really ever found a use for sending false there, and it's the same way back. We should expect a final message from our front end, but we'll get to that in a bit. So it's pretty simple. Socket.sendStringMessage is how you send a string to a socket, or using our JSON from here that we've created to send to the front, and we're making sure that we don't send the message to the user that did send the message. We just want to send it to everybody else so they can see what they said. And that is pretty much as simple as I can make a chat room. Because it's a singleton, we'll be able to use the same instance everywhere with a really easy syntax, and that means that everybody gets stored in the same place, in the same object, and when everybody talks, that uses the same list of everyone, which is really kind of important. So the last thing we need to talk about then is making our handlers. So I'm gonna leave this for now because this is the boilerplate on how to return a request handler with the config data syntax, and of course we need that here, and that's got to be a function that returns a request handler. I'm just going to leave that for now while we actually make our WebSocket handler. So that's going to be a class, and it's going to be, we'll call it chat handler to make things simple, and that has got to be a WebSocket. Aha! And of course it's not coming up because I failed to import perfect WebSockets. There it is. That is a WebSocket session handler. This is not a WebSocket handler. This is a WebSocket session handler because we need to handle the whole session. And WebSocket session handler is a protocol, and we're going to have to conform to it, so it's going to yell at me until I do that. First, we're going to need a user, and that's a chat user, of course, because we need to know who we're dealing with here, and I'm just going to make that optional and set it to nil for now. And we need two things to conform to WebSocket Session Handler. We need a socket protocol, which we can auto-complete, and I'm going to make that chat, and I'll go over why for just a moment. Protocols are just, they come over from WebSockets, and they're a way to validate that you're getting what you want to get. When you actually create a WebSocket, which is over here in the JavaScript, you see that we created, new WebSocket on the host name with /chat, which is of course the URL I'm using, and then the protocol is sent as chat. So we're just kind of validating that we, I want to go back to handlers, that we want a chat, and there's one more place that'll go. we don't need to put it there now. We just need to know that if you don't put it here, and you don't put it here, and you don't put it in the junk we're going to put up here in a minute, it's not going to work because it's not going to validate. The other thing we have to conform to is, well, handle session, because we've got to handle the session. And that's going to take request and socket, and we need to do something with it. So, well, what do we need to do? Well, if we're in a WebSocket session handler, we're probably getting a message. So we're going to take that socket and we're going to read the message. So we'll read string message. Okay? And that takes the argument continuation, which is actually a function. And the function takes 3 arguments, which is an optional string, an opcode type, and a boolean. And if you remember when I talked about the passing the true value when we're sending a message to say that it's final, that's what this boolean is. That's going to say, hey, this is the last chunk. The opcode type, we're getting text messages, so this is similar in HTML to saying like application JSON or text HTML. This is just going to say, our opcode's going to say text when we get a message that's text, and then our string will have a value. So to clean this up a little bit, since it's a the last function, I can put it in a closure, right? And we're going to get that string, we're going to get that opcode, and we're going to get that final boolean, and we're going to do stuff with it. What are we going to do with it? Well, first thing we need to do is guard let string equals string, right? So if you remember this, the string that we got from read string message is optional. This is an optional string. We want to make sure there's a value there, because when we get an empty message with no value, that actually means that someone closed the WebSocket. So we'll just say socket.close and return for now. I'm going to do a little bit more there later. But if we have no value here, that means somebody closed the socket, the script closed the socket, somebody closed their browser window, we don't have anything, we need to close our socket and move on with life. Otherwise, we do have a string, so we're going to need to do something with that. And remember, that's going to be JSON, because we're sending JSON from the front end and we're sending JSON back to the front end. So here we can just say failed to decode JSON from socket message, so that we'll know what's going on if we do actually get an error. So in here, I'm going to do a couple of things. I'm also going to guard that final is equal to true, because we want to know that we're not working with a partial piece, that we've actually got everything. And then we're going to need some JSON. We're going to try the string from above .json decode as, and of course we have to tell it what we want, is a dictionary of string any. So we're going to try to decode it as that. Otherwise, we're going to get out of here and return. So now we've got some JSON. Well, remember I made that user up above here, that user property. And remember I made a throwing initializer that takes JSON. So if we've just decoded some, we might as well make a user out of it, out of the data in it. And then let's make sure we've got a user. And make sure that all that worked. So we've got a value, we can make it a non-optional value to work with. So we're going to need to do something with that user and message, right? But before I get too far, I'm going to go outside of this do try catch loop, and I'm just going to put down self.handle session with the request that came in from above and the same socket. Because if we've looped around here and we've done something, we need to go back and look for more messages. If you don't put this in here, you're only going to get the first message that's sent and you won't get anything else. Go back and look for more messages. right? Otherwise, we're just going to get the first one, and it's going to sit there and do nothing. So we don't want that. All right, so we've decoded a message. We've got a chat user. We've got two scenarios in here to handle. One is that somebody joined, and that's the reason we're getting a message, and one is that we actually got a message to send to everybody. So the first thing I'm going to do is if let message equals JSON message. So if I got JSON from the front end and it had a message in it, I'm going to need to send that message. So we're going to send message. If I didn't, that means I just got a user without a message, which means that somebody's new and they're joining. They must be joining, so add them to the chat, right? So let's, and this is kind of the way I designed the front end, that we get a message that just has an email, an avatar, and a display name, then that means they're joining, and if it sends a message with that, well, we know who's sending it, and we know to send that message out because there's a message in it. So if we've got a message, we need to send that message. It's pretty simple. We're going to pull up our chat room. We're going to pull up our instance so that we're all working in the same place, and this is where the singleton comes in really handy. And we're going to send that message, right? So we're going to send that message. And of course, I just saw that any in there, so that means I need to cast it as a string because we're working from string any. And we're going to need to send that from chat user that we unwrapped right here, so we know who's sending the message. That's right, let user. Of course, everybody on the internet's screaming at me that I forgot that, but so chat user. That's why that didn't autofill. All right. The other thing is that they need to join. So if you remember, we also made a join function on our chat room. So let's access our singleton instance of it so we make sure all the data is in one place. And let's join a user. And we're going to say that that's the same chat user that would be joining. But this time we also need to pass in the socket that we're on so that we know where to send the messages later. And again, that's just going to go into our service. It's going to grab this instance from our singleton. It's going to take that socket that we're working with and that user that we're working with, and it's going to store them for later so we can send everybody messages. Again, like I said, we should probably be handling authentication and validating emails and making sure people are unique and all that fun stuff, but I can't pack that into a half-hour or 45-minute webinar that we're working with right now, so we're not going to do that. We're just going to assume that we can, for the purposes of demo, put a unique value in there. So they must be joining, add them to the chat. Cool. And then again, we're just going to loop around and look for more messages. So that should be enough that we can do that. So now we just need to modify our handler here to get a request handler for a route that actually is a WebSocket session handler. What I recommend is that if you just look in the example and you look in the handler, just grab this boilerplate out usually, and when you're working with WebSockets, and then modify it for what you're going to need, because there's really only 3 things that you're going to need to do here. Is you're going to need to change this to your actual class. You're going to need to change this to make sure it matches your protocol here, and that it matches your protocol that you're sending from the front end. And then you're going to need to change the name of the function. So we can just call this handler still, since we're only working with one. I think I called it chat handler in my original example, but this is already handler. We'll just call it handler. Returning your request handler. It just returns a closure with request response in. A new WebSocket handler, handler producer, and that takes this function in this, which is guarding to make sure the protocol is right, and then returning an instance of the chat handler, and then of course proceeding on to handle request. So if you're going to make that from scratch, I guess we can just to show. So it's going to be a WebSocket handler, And the initializer for that takes this. It takes handler producer, which is a WebSocket Handler producer, right? Which is kind of a mouthful, but the gist of that is I can put a closure in here to handle it. Let's open that up and give us some space. And what that needs is request, which is an HTTP request. And that needs protocols, which is just an array of strings that we get to see what the protocols are, and that's just going to return WebSocket session handler, which is optional, in the code that we're actually going to write, which would be guard protocols contains. So I want to make sure that it says chat in there somewhere in all the protocols that we're sending across. Otherwise, we're just going to return null so that we say, hey, we're not going to handle this. That's not cool. Otherwise, we are going to return an instance of the chat handler that I made below. And then, of course, we actually have to run handle request with request and response to make sure that that actually handles. That's kind of how that all goes together. Really, when I make WebSockets, I just grab some of this boilerplate from an example, I drop it in, I change the function name, I change the protocol name, and I change this, and the rest of this is pretty much always the same. That's the easiest way to do it. And then probably one of the easier ways to do it is when you're making your actual handler class to just copy it from an example and modify what you need to modify until you really get used to it, or if you're running those a lot, you'll kind of remember it. So that is everything on the front end. We have our chat handler that should actually be loading a WebSocket session handler. We have our front end that's serving our static website. In the static website, I've got just standard headers. I'm pulling in Twitter Bootstrap to use for CSS, to make life easy, and then I've got my own custom styles in a style sheet here that makes this look nice and orange. Let's see. Then in the footers, we've got, I'm loading all my JavaScript libraries that I'm using, as well as jQuery and Bootstraps to make all that work. I was actually, in my private code here, working on some users online, and you'll see it pop up here. It doesn't work yet. I haven't made that, and I don't want to cover it in the webinar, because I actually tried that on a dry run, and it took me like an hour and a half to make sure that that was all covered, so it would just run a bit long. So for now, ignore that. All you really need to know is that in the HTML, we've got a chat window, and inside that chat window, we've got a section for messages, and we've got a section with a send bar that just is an input and a send button for the form. So let's go ahead and recompile this and make sure that I typed everything correctly. I'm just going to close local variables here and make this a little bigger, so hopefully it's easier to see on the web. We've got our index. I know how it's supposed to look from CSS. Again, not really here to try and teach anybody HTML or CSS. There are plenty of resources for that on the internet, as well as JavaScript, jQuery, and working with WebSockets from the front end. I'm trying to focus on the back end. Animations is just some stored animations to make this little box get way bigger and pop into view. That is just my chat window. If you look in here, it's just scaled to 0.01, just it makes it really small. And then once we get the data we need from the front end, it's just animations. It's going to use the dynamics library to pop it into place and make it look good. When it comes, MD5 and MD5.map are just two JavaScript libraries that I'm using to make the MD5 hash of the user's email to send to the back end and to make that Gravatar API work. And then I've got WebChat.js, which is loaded and actually handles our front end WebSocket. So I've defined a web chat here, and I'm holding a variable called chat that makes a new one, and it sends it window location host, which of course is just this root URL here. And it takes that host name and it makes chat.socket, new WebSocket. Chat is just this. This is how we do objects in JavaScript. It's a little wonky. It's not as fun as Swift, but it's the works, and it's what we use for the front end. So I've got chat.socket as a new WebSocket with the WebSocket Protocol, the host name that I'm pulling in from window location host here, putting it at that /chat route that we made in our handler, and sending the protocol chat. Super. So let's load this. So what actually happens is we get a prompt, and that's because when I say chat.socket.onOpen, I'm saying prompt for user info. So when a new socket opens, prompt for user info. I'm saying, well, we don't have a username, which is username, display name, and avatar defined empty up here. Well, we don't have one. Ask for one. So what's your Gravatar email? Anything works. So really anything we can hash works. So as long as this isn't blank, the field will load and you'll get a default avatar. Because if you go to Gravatar or avatar and you put any hash in there that doesn't equate to an email that they have in file, you still get the default avatar. So I'm just going to put in my email, so it'll hash it. And then next, of course, we have a username. So while we don't have a display name, ask what you want to be called. Well, I want to be called Ryan. And then, of course, that just hashes it and creates that and starts a chat. So when a chat starts, it takes the email, the URL, and the name, of course. It makes some JSON out of it to send to our WebSocket. It sends it to the socket that was created. And then it runs show chat window, which is really just this animation up here that makes this window pop into place. So that's pretty simple. So we've got a chat window. And remember, I said in the HTML we had a section for messages and then a form with a send button. So, created the WebSocket. We created some JSON. Just give me a sec here. All right, created the JSON and we sent it. So this email, avatar, and display name went to the back end, hit a handler. Handler said OK. Decode that, make a user from it if all that worked. And we've got a user. We need to do something with it. Well, did we send a value that said message? No, we did not. So we don't have a message in there. It's just going to skip and go to the join. It hit the join in the instance, and join took that socket and user, added them to here, and then said send message from bot. So the bot went out, made some JSON to send back with a user, a message, an avatar, and because bot didn't equal myself, it still sent that bot said Ryan joined because, of course, I am not bot and bot is not me. Socket.send sent the JSON. JSON came to the front end. In the front end, we actually have down here on message, take what's received, turn it into JSON, right? JSON.parse the received data. You can ignore this if else because that was something else I was working on. This is what was important, is that we got a new message. So it took that encoded message, avatar, and user. And remember I said it was user.displayname : message. Well, it took that, it broke it off, and it said chat.append message. And it sent the message, the avatar, and whether or not it was self-sent. So in this case, self-sent is also false. All self-sent does is say that if I send it, it puts it on the right instead of the left. It just adds an extra class to move it over here so it looks more like a chat. So append a message just takes those in. It grabs the messages, a reference to the messages section. It creates an element with the message and the avatar and the text, and then if it was self-sent, it does add that class for self. And it just appends that, and it makes sure that the scroll scrolls so the chat scrolls. Let's see, the only other thing I need to cover then is what happens when I send a message. Well, I've got this down here in a quick jQuery, and it grabs the form here, and it says when we submit it, the first thing we want to do is stop it from doing what it normally does. So don't reload the page or make a post request or stop the default behavior. So when I say hi, stops the default behavior. It grabs a reference to the text that you typed into here, and then it takes the text you grabbed, the avatar, and it was self-sent, and appends it, which runs that append so you get it over here on the right. And then it also sends that to the chat. And you'll notice, of course, I don't get the hi back from myself because when we send that message, chat.sendMessage, I grab the email and display name and avatar that were stored at the top here when we created this session. And then I add the message that comes in, and I send it through the socket. It hits the handler, handles the session. We did get a message, so we need to send that message. It goes through the chat room, sends the message, I am me. So this fails, it does nothing, and it only sends it to people who aren't me. So let's add somebody who's not me. Right? So I'm just going to use 12 and 12. So 12 joined. I should get a message here that says 12 joined the chat. And I can say something like, hey 12. And 12 will get a message from me. And I can say, hey Ryan, from this side. And I will get the message over here, because as those messages are being sent, they're looping through and saying for everybody in here, which is currently now, though there's a 12 and a Ryan and 2 sockets, it's sending it just like that. We can add another one called 13. Hey all. I can add hey everybody, right? And that should appear in both chats. Hey everybody, hey everybody. And then if I send him back, of course, it's going to appear in both these chats. So we have a basic working web chat. We're using perfect WebSockets. That's kind of the gist of how everything goes. If you have any questions, I believe Lucas will be getting ready to field questions to me right now. If you want that example or any other example, again, best place to go is GitHub/perfect examples. You've got a nice repository of all sorts of different examples. There's 2 pages of them, tons of stuff to do. WebSockets are fun, WebSockets are easy. They're not that bad. Just make sure, and the one caveat that's always the getcha is that when you're handler, make sure you go back and handle that session again and loop back to handle session. Otherwise, what's going to happen is you'll get the first message and nothing else. I reiterate that a lot because I've done it to myself a few times. All right. So Lucas says we have no questions yet. I'll wait a minute here before ending the live stream to see if we do have any questions. I hope you enjoyed the webinar. If you want to get in touch with me after, you can always find me on the Perfect Slack channel at RYMCOL, that's RYMCOL, or on most social media at the same. I'm RYMCOL on Twitter or Facebook or Snapchat and all that as well. If you want to look for perfect resources, perfect.org is a great place to go. And again, GitHub to the perfect examples repo is a great place to go. And I believe at this time we will fully open that up to any questions anyone has. If not, that's fine. Like I said, everybody can go ahead and contact me after on the Perfect Slack channel. If you aren't on the Perfect Slack channel and you want to join, just you can go in your web browser and hit perfect.ly.ly. And I'm not sure why that's not loading right now, but it should. Perfect.org. You can join. You can get an invite to join the Slack channel. There it is. I will ask someone at Perfect why that's looping around like that, but it looks like there might be a little problem with the script. But that should, in general, that should give you an invite to the Slack channel. If you're not there, you can reach. There's a ton of helpful people in there. I'm in there as well if you have any questions at RYMCOL. And thank you everyone for watching. And since I still see no questions, I'm going to go ahead and terminate the screen. The live feed. This should be available on YouTube for you to watch after. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.